Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending our session today on community impact. I'm Chris Atterbury with Datatelligent. Just a few things before we get started. This session will be recorded, and everyone attending will receive a link to view the recording. The slide presentation will be available upon request. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to post them either in the Q&A section or in the chat section, and we will respond. If we do not have time to get to all questions, we will follow up with you to make sure that you get an answer. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann Hartman, who is the Director of Customer Solutions at Datatelligent. Ann?
Thank you all so much for joining us today. Once again, I'm Ann Hartman, the Director of Nonprofit Solutions. And before joining Datatelligent, I spent about 25 years in the nonprofit space, working with local, state, and community-based organizations on programs to serve clients. So as a former CEO of a nonprofit, I really know how critical it is to have the data you need to tell your story so that you can raise money for your mission. And we're really excited today to provide some tips on how you can use your data to demonstrate community impact. And we're even more excited to share a real life case study of how to put these tips into action. Our agenda for today, includes a look at some of the current trends and challenges that nonprofits face as they work to show community impact. And then next, what we'd like to do is have Milele Kennedy, the Director of Community Nutrition and Food Programs for the City of Indianapolis and the Board Chair of Indianapolis Community Food Access Coalition, talk about how she and her team leveraged her program's data to demonstrate the community impact of their programming. And then finally, we'll have Steve Whitekin, the Chief Customer Officer for Datatelligent, provide some best practices for nonprofits who want to become more data-driven organizations. So let's take a quick look at the nonprofit landscape. As you're probably all aware, there's some pretty stiff competition for the resources nonprofits need to meet their mission. And we all know that, having data to tell your story helps you to stand out in the crowd. But nonprofits often have a fragmented data strategy that doesn't allow them to optimize the data that they actually have. And then finally, in addition to a nonprofit's internal data, there's often a lack of knowledge about how to find external data to put that story in context and really make it more compelling. So we know competition for dollars is stiff. There's more than 10 million nonprofits worldwide and more than 1.5 million in the United States alone. With 24/7 news coverage, social media, that makes it easier than ever for causes from around the world to make a pitch for finite resources. And nonprofits have to find a way to shine a light on their organization, to highlight the good work they're doing. And more, this good work requires evidence in the form of data that shows people are better off for having worked with their organization. This data has to be packaged in different ways for different audiences. What's interesting and contrary to popular belief is that most nonprofits are not supported primarily by donations. So only about 13% of nonprofit funding comes from philanthropic sources, such as individuals, foundations, and corporate sponsorships. The majority, almost 50%, comes from fees for programs, goods, and services. And then another third of nonprofit funding comes from governmental sources. And for any of you who've received a government contract, you know that winning the contract takes a lot. It requires an extensive application with lots of data requirements to demonstrate that your organization is the best fit for the contract. And then when you win the contract, sort of the fun continues in the form of lots of data reporting requirements. Another variable that's affected funding, and I know all of you are probably painfully aware of this, is the COVID-19 pandemic. when the pandemic first hit, many nonprofits were provided with more non-restricted funding than ever before. And so dollars were being provided just to, quote, keep the doors open. However, in a recent study by the Federal Reserve Bank, it showed that individual corporate donations and fees for services actually decreased in 2021 compared to 2020. While on the other hand, government funding increased a whopping 39%. And we know that a lot of that is due to the American Rescue Plan Act funding. And I hope that all of you on this webinar were able to benefit from that in some way for your organizations. Finally, funding from foundations also went up about 8%. So again, lots of funding among multiple organizations vying for funds from multiple sources. That makes it even more critical that you can demonstrate the impact your organization has on the community. Another challenge that nonprofits often face is what we call a fragmented data strategy. So we all know that we need data, but there isn't always a good plan to make that happen. And one of the main reasons is that nonprofits, they just don't have the time or the personnel to focus on data. In a recent survey, 79% of nonprofits said this was the main reason they weren't making better use of their data. Another 55% said their staff just didn't have enough experience using data. And almost half said that the reason they didn't make better use of their data is that it was scattered all over the place. Because the data were siloed across the organization, they often didn't have access to the data they needed. And then in many cases, this actually resulted in duplication of data collection efforts because one department or staff member didn't know what another department was collecting. Another 42% said they didn't have the tools that they needed to analyze the data. And then more than a third said they simply aren't collecting enough data to effectively analyze the impact of their organization. A third challenge that nonprofits face is having external data that validates the need for their services or helps to put the need for their services in context. There is so much data available, sometimes it's hard to know where to even start. So finding the right data is the first challenge. For instance, when you go to data.gov, there are more than 200,000 data tables to select from. And then nonprofits often have specific data that they want to use to benchmark data against or to use to put their data in context. So some of these might include things like census.data.gov, National Center for Education Statistics, Feeding America, and more. It takes time and experience with each site to find the data you need. And then once you find the right data set, you need to extract or procure the data from the site. And sometimes it's really straightforward, just download the Excel file to your desktop. But other times it can be more complicated. For instance, you might want to incorporate a shapefile or map from one of the sites, but it's not always easy to tell which of the many files in the data set to select. Then the next challenge is getting the data in the right format to include in your analysis. For instance, your download might be in a PDF format, so you'll need to convert it to Excel or some kind of CSV format to allow you to do any analysis with the data. Finally, integrating the data with your existing organizational data can present its own challenges. How do you use this data to provide context for your story? So what I'd like to do now is to turn it over to Milele. She and her team faced a lot of these challenges that I just talked about, and she can walk through her team's specific challenges and how she overcame them to tell her story. So Milele, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Anne. Again, I'm Milele Kennedy. I am the Director of Community Nutrition and Food Programs for the City of Indianapolis. I am also Board Chair for the Indianapolis Community Food Access Coalition. And we faced many of the challenges that Anne has just talked about as we were working to stand up our coalition. Our coalition was brought about in the beginning of 2021 as part of an ongoing strategic planning phase of the city of Indianapolis and the Indy Food Council. In the wake of the pandemic, we knew that we needed to have a more community-driven approach to our food system. And so our vision really was to be able to ensure that everyone in Marion County had access to healthy and nutritious food. That was something that became quite a struggle for many families during the pandemic. And we realized that we needed to come together as a coalition to help support our residents. And so we really wanted to not just push programs out the door, but really work on building programs that were equitable, sustainable, and accessible for our residents. We want to make sure that we're improving access to healthy food across all demographics. We want to make sure that we have equitable access to food within the food system. And we want to make sure that we're going beyond just food security to ensuring that there's nutrition security for our residents. And that meant expanding our programs, ensuring that there was access as well as food security, and then also increase our community-based approach to improve the health of our residents. So we started in 2019 on the far east side of Indianapolis with a little bit of funding that we had to be able to begin the Lyft Grocery Access Program. The far east side of Indianapolis is one of the largest food deserts in the country. Residents can go as far as 5 miles to be able to get to and from the grocery store. And there's also very little public transportation in that area. In addition to being such a large food desert and having such low public transportation access, the area was also filled with different food swamps. And that's where there's a high concentration of residents and a high concentration of fast food and unhealthy food options. So these are the kinds of things that we looked at when we were thinking about how to build up this program. We wanted to make sure that the people that were living in the food desert, which in Indianapolis, that's over 20,000 people, 1/5 of our residents, had better access to grocery stores, full service stores that provided them with all of the nutrition that they needed. The number of residents within the food desert have risen by 10%. In the wake of COVID, that number has risen even further. And we realized that we needed to provide more targeted resources to these families. And so the Lyft Grocery Access Program was brought about to be able to get Marion County residents to and from those SNAP and WIC certified grocery stores to ensure that they would have everything that they needed in the transportation to get to and from those valuable resources. Our challenges were that we didn't know when we expanded this program from just the far east side of Indianapolis to all of Marion County during COVID, we didn't have any data to be able to show the impact of the program. And we knew that since the funding that we had was short-term, we had federal funding in the form of CARES Act funding. We had additional funding resources brought in from philanthropic partners, other grants, that we were going to need to have a way to be able to track our program's impact over time. And we didn't have a way to do that without data. We were collecting just the basic numbers in an Excel spreadsheet, and that Excel spreadsheet would go, into a file, and it was sitting there. But we knew that we were going to have to do more to be able to translate that data into a way that we can demonstrate the impact of the program. And so we knew we needed to be able to show things like the specific number of rides per month, whether we had unique or repeat riders, what time were people going to and from the grocery stores? Were they going to the same stores every time, or were they going to different stores based on their need? And then we really wanted to know, were our impacts in those specific low access areas that we were trying to support. Again, our whole goal was to ensure that we were providing access to food for people that were in underserved communities, especially those underserved communities of color, and those communities that had multiple disparities. And so we needed to find a way to translate our data into something that really visualizes the impact.
Right, and so thanks, Milele. So yeah, Milele described that they knew there was a need. They had started a program and had some data, but they weren't sure, what to do with it to show that impact. And so our first step was to gather all of the data that they needed and to bring it into Tableau. Tableau is a business intelligence software that we use to analyze data and create visualizations. And so Milele provided the Lyft data set, the SNAP store locations, and then the food desert data set that to help us get started. And because Lyft didn't provide any demographic data about the riders, we needed to find some proxy data that would help us describe the population that was using the grocery access program. As Milele mentioned, to show that this program was impacting the disproportionately affected population. So we researched data sets on census.data.gov and found data sets and found demographics and socioeconomic data that we could include in the analysis. So we brought all these data sets into Tableau. But the Lyft data, however, it needed to be reformatted before we could include it in our dashboard. And we did this using a feature in Tableau Online called Tableau Prep. So it's an easy to use utility that will clean, transform, and shape your data. So here are some examples of the data challenges that the Lyft data presented. In some months, the Lyft data set had the pickup month year as one column, like this, and then in others it separated the month and the year. And then there were similar variations in the trip time period, trip length, and trip duration. So what we did is we used Tableau Prep to combine these data into a consistent format. And then we could use that in the Tableau dashboards. So we then used the data to create these visualizations that helped Milele and her team identify those KPIs that she needed for her funders. So at a glance, you can see the number of rides, the total dollars spent, and the unique riders for any given time period. She could also see the utilization trends. So rides by month, by day, by time of day, and then all of this down to a specific zip code. Another thing that Milele had pointed out when we were talking is that this ride was, this program was specifically for Marion County residents. And so she needed to find a way to identify rides that were outside of that, the Marion County area. So we were able to identify, down here, we were able to identify specific zip codes and the number of rides and the number of dollars that were being spent on those rides. And she could provide this data to Lyft with these specific details about the out of area rides so that it would prevent further violations. Next, by incorporating the SNAP store location data into the visualization, Milele and her team could see the average number of unique stores visited by rider. They could see the average distance traveled to the store and the count of the unique stores visited. And then adding the food desert shapefile helped to paint the picture of the need more clearly. So it highlighted the areas of the city that had no access to healthy food options. Then to add more context to the story, we brought in the demographic and socioeconomic data. We were able to make it simple to display the data from multiple data sets with a single filter. So in this view, you'll see that race ethnicity is selected, and it allowed Milele and her team to understand the race and ethnicity breakdown of the population by specific zip codes. In this view, using the same filter, but selecting a different option, so selecting the sex and age data, Milele had access to the age breakdown of each zip code. And this was helpful not only for the Lyft Grocery Access Program, but also for other funders that she needed to report to. So at first we planned on bucketing bucketing or grouping the age data, but after talking with Milele, we discovered that that having access to all of the different age groupings allowed her to use this data for other grants. So for instance, it was important to have data for people ages 65 to 74 for a senior related grant, while the 65 year and over was fine for another grant. And then finally, using the same filter, we brought in the socioeconomic data for each zip code. So things like the percent below poverty, percent on SNAP, percent with a disability, again, to help paint that picture and show funders and stakeholders that this Lyft Grocery Access Program was actually reaching the population that it was intended to.
So the community impact that we were able to show with the Lyft Grocery Access Program and the data were almost immediate. We had easy access to data to be able to show through the visualizations that you've just seen, our funders exactly how well the program was working. And that was really valuable to the grant reporting that we had, to showing internally how impactful our program was. And then we realized that this data was able to be utilized in a lot of different areas. So as we started looking at developing other programs or looking for targeted groups within the city, the census data by zip code was a really quick and easy go-to for us to see what are the demographics of specific zip codes, what type of programs can we put into these low access areas. And so as we did community outreach, as we did additional partnerships with different food serving organizations, we were able to utilize that data in a lot of different ways. And then the other thing we were able to do is show the impact that the program was having, and how funding related to the ability to create access for our residents. Because we showed over time, month by month, how broadening the scope of the Lyft Grocery Access Program provided better access to Marion County residents, and also utilization of the program by showing that the utilization of the program was primarily by residents that were in those geographically impacted areas. And that's exactly what we wanted to show. And of course, our main goal was to prove that we were actually ensuring that people living in food desert areas were getting and utilizing the Lyft Grocery Access Program to be able to have access to healthy food. And that was our main goal. We wanted to make sure that as we look to future funding, that we were meeting that goal. And this data definitely was a game changer for us to be able to show how effective our program was in those areas.
Thanks so much, Milele. Again, it's from my time spent in the nonprofit space, I know how critical it is just to have that data, to be able to tell that story. And then when you are, it is, as you said, Milele, it's a game changer. It really helps people understand, funders understand the need and why it's important to support the programs that we offer. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Steve Whitekin, our Chief Customer Officer, to talk about some best practices for becoming a data-driven organization. So Steve, I'll send it over to you.
Thank you, Ann and Milele. That was a great overview. And also, I think it's a great example of showing how a leader like Milele is pulling our organization to become more data-driven. And this is what I want to discuss today. I want to provide a framework organizations can follow to become more data-driven. So what you see here is a data maturity model that we have adopted to better understand and conceptualize how organizations kind of move up that data maturity kind of spectrum. As you can see on the far left-hand side, we have organizations that are data aware. Now, these are companies, organizations that use analytics in more of a manual, non-standard way, and decisions are rarely driven by data. And also, typically, what data they do have and analytics they do have is really not a lot of people have access to it. It's usually a few folks within an organization that actually have that data. At the other end is data driven, okay? And these are organizations that have data embedded in everything they do, allowing everyone throughout the organization to use data to drive decisions. Typically, organizations are somewhere in between the data aware and data driven, usually somewhere between data proficient and data savvy. And what they're looking for are some way of keep moving up that spectrum to where they eventually become data driven. Now, we at Datatelligent have looked at that and have arrived at three principles that help organization become more data driven. The first is make data analytics transformational. Second is invest what you can. And third is establish a unified approach. Now, I'm going to go through each of these a little bit more in depth here. Starting with data analytics, making data analytics transformational. And what we mean with this is that we recommend you connect your analytics to your organization's overall mission, strategy, and goals, and then tailor your approach accordingly. And what this does, it ensures that your analytics program is aligned with your company's direction and it supports it in its success. Now, once you kind of have that understood, we recommend you develop a roadmap for building that data-driven organization. This will be kind of the path you're going to follow to mature up that and move up that spectrum that we talked about earlier. Second is invest what you can. Now, this is important once you know that roadmap, because getting there can be somewhat daunting, especially for organizations that have limited resources. So what we recommend is that you start small. Focus on what are the high value solutions that you can accomplish now and get that quick return on investment. This also allows you to get some momentum within your organization and show the value of your work, right? So you start moving forward on that. And we recommend that. We recommend a very iterative approach to this process here, because we know it can't happen overnight. And finally, to really be successful, we recommend moving towards a unified data platform where silos are removed and data important to your organization is in one platform. And what this does, this allows you to have one source of truth for your organization, which then allows for easier development of analytic solutions and getting some value out of your data, okay? So all three together are really a great way for you to kind of move your organization along that continuum to become a data-driven organization. Now, we at Datatelligent have embedded this framework into our approach for helping our customers become more data mature. And what we've done, we've created a new way of doing data analytics, what we call data analytics as a service. So instead of the traditional approach of negotiating a set number of hours to deliver a specific deliverable, what we offer is a subscription to our customers, and then we become their data analytics team throughout the life of that subscription. This allows us to provide value in a short time frame, typically about 90 days, and allows us to be very flexible, adjusting our efforts based on our customers' changing needs. We also help enable the use of data as a strategic asset by connecting it to the overall organization's missions and goals. And finally, due to our approach, customers find that how we work with them very easy, right? They find it a lot easier than a traditional time and materials model that they may be used to with other vendors. We provide flexible, comprehensive approach to your analytic needs. And the way we do that is we offer our services, we offer three kind of components here, right? The first are solutions. These are, we offer what we call solution engines for nonprofit organizations. And I'll go through some of these a little more in depth on the next slide here. But what we offer, we have two flavors of these. We have analytic solution engines and data solution engines. The analytic solution engines are basically templates that you can follow based on your business need, right? That we can bring to your organization and quickly turn around and provide that value. Similarly, we do the similar thing on the data that you need for your analytics. Some organizations already have an analytics team that can build solutions, but they need help with the data side. They frequently ask, can someone come in and help create these data sets that we need and manage those data sets that we need to drive analytics? That's something we provide through our partnership. Second is operations. This is where we assist with managing your data operations, including software licensing, as well as building that unified data platform that we talked about earlier. And finally is partnership. As your data, when you sign up with us, we are your data analytics partner throughout the life of that subscription. We work with you to develop that data maturity roadmap that we talked about, plus a customer success plan. And this is where we sit down with you, we make sure we're aligned on your organization's mission and strategies just to ensure that we are successful. Now, I alluded to this earlier, but to help with the speed to value for our solutions, we developed these solution engines, and you can see these a little bit more in detail here. You can see we have 5 different categories of solution engines for nonprofits that we bring to the table. Okay, you can see the first group is strategy and operations. This is where we have solution engines to help with your budget forecasting, your membership growth. Client service will be more focused on the outputs and outcomes of any kind of effort that you have, and as well as looking at your community impact, okay, to see how programs that maybe you instituted, how they are impacting the community, making sure that you're achieving the goals that you set out to. We have solution engines around team engagement, fund development, and marketing as well. Okay, and each of these then have been based on our experience with other nonprofits we can bring to you through that subscription. Okay, and the value in these engines is that they quickly turn your data into those insights you're looking for that you need to kind of improve and drive your organization. Well, that brings us to the end of the webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. A special thank to Milele for telling her story, as well as being a great partner to Datatelligent. If you want to reach out to me or Ann, here's our emails. And again, thank you for attending.